Welcome to EcoEye. In this episode, we'll have a close look at the life cycle of our vehicles. We'll be exploring the relationship between the environment and our health. And we take a trip back in time to some of the most spectacular monastic settlements in Ireland.
Today, we've a real treat for you as we visit one of Ireland's most precious heritage sites. It's also a unique wildlife habitat with its own microclimate. We're visiting Skellig Islands, which has for over 1,000 years been a magnet for pilgrims and tourists alike.
The word Skellig means steep rock. Skellig Michael and Little Skellig are on the westernmost edge of the Kerry Mountains, where they dip beneath the Atlantic Ocean. At 13 kilometres from the coast, you can really feel the isolation. And that's what brought the medieval monks here, for their life of contemplation and hardship. That same isolation is also pure heaven for the 66,000 gannets who breed here every year. Skellig Michael is not designed to be either easily accessible or convenient for tourists. Its status as a World Heritage Site means it's afforded the highest level of protection possible. I spoke to Claire O'Halloran from the OPW about protecting the island.
The main thing which is done here is that access to the island is carefully limited. Particularly numbers are controlled. That's the best way of protecting it. As well as that, there's a constant presence here so that visitors are supervised while they're here. This would be a very, very fragile environment. First of all, it's a wilderness. It's a very important colony of birds. It's absolutely wonderful to be living here in a wildlife reserve. We live in the middle of a huge colony of puffins and other seabirds which are nesting here during the summer. The marine life as well is very, very spectacular. And of course, you know, the island itself visually is very, very spectacular.
Claire took me to meet Alan Walsh, who monitors the fragile habitats and nesting grounds of the island's birds.
Alan, this is an incredibly fragile ecosystem out here. Where do birds fit into it?
Well, because we're on the western fringe of Europe, it's a very, very special habitat for birds. It's a very remote island. It's almost 9 miles from the mainland. And we have a vast number of birds actually breeding here. The highest number of gannets breeding in the country is only about 1 kilometre away as part of the Skelligs on the Little Skelligs. And that supports up to 30,000 pairs of gannets each year, which is 90,000 birds at the height of any season.
So, with so many visitors coming out onto the island, so many tourists, how do they impact on the bird life out here?
Very thankfully, none whatsoever, because people are marshalled in such a way that they're not allowed to roam all over the island. The birds have the island to themselves primarily. So, and the ones that are most visible to the tourists would be the puffins, and they've become very much acclimatized to human disturbance. We've been doing monitoring of the populations here for the past number of years, since the 1990s, and populations are relatively stable. We will get fluctuations because of global sort of warming and so on. Fish stocks will go up and will go down. But seabirds generally live to such a great age, 25 to 50 years of age, that they only need to replace themselves once in order for it to be successful.
And are the birds here mostly in the winter months overwintering here, or will you see more in the summer?
You will see the majority of birds here usually in June. That's the peak of the breeding season. People coming in August, September might be disappointed not to find the puffins because they've moved on out into the open Atlantic at that stage. But generally speaking, birds will start coming back to their natal colony to breed here in around February, March, April onwards.
On top of the island's rocky slopes and cliffs, the monastery sits with its breathtaking views on all sides. Built to hold back the elements, it has withstood time itself, and still holds an awe-inspiring sense of calmness and silence. I met archaeologist Dr. John Sheehan.
John, this is an incredible structure, so isolated from the coast and so high up. How did it get here?
Well, we actually have to go back, Duncan, to Egypt, to the deserts of Egypt, to understand how the Skellig came about. Back in the 3rd century, St. Paul and St. Anthony, the fathers of monasticism, went into the Egyptian desert as hermits. And within a short space of time, large numbers of followers followed them into the desert, and monasteries evolved and were founded. And that idea spread right across the Mediterranean over a few centuries, up through Gaul, and eventually came to Ireland, where it took root. And not only did it take root here, but the Irish monks tried to emulate the Egyptian desert monks, and they sought out the harshest environments in which to found their monasteries. And you couldn't find a harsher environment than Skellig Michael.
And to build this in this height, in such a remote position.
It's true, we're 600 feet above sea level, we're on a 45-degree rock slope. They had to level it all off with terraces before they built the cells that we see behind us here. So there was a massive amount of forethought and engineering work went into the construction of the monastery before a prayer was said in it.
So how many of these beehive huts or clochons did they build here?
There are 6 well-preserved beehive huts behind us, and the remains of some others have been found on the island. In addition then, there are 3 churches. 2 of them are early medieval, probably 9th or 10th century. And then we have one, the church behind us here, 12th century church, which is dedicated to St. Michael, the patron saint of high places. 12 monks would have lived here, perhaps an abbot, and of course a hermit who lived on the south peak of the island, a remote spot, 100 feet higher than where we are now. He was living out there in further isolation from the rest of them. So a dozen or 14 monks in total.
And how did they live here? What did they eat?
Well, today it looks like a desolate island in the Atlantic, but in fact it's been described as a food pyramid because you have thousands of seabirds, you have their eggs. If you fish off the rocks below, you're guaranteed to catch food. So in fact there was never any shortage of food. They would have had to import grain from the mainland, but probably little enough else.
This is a World Heritage Site, and how difficult is it to maintain these structures?
Well, UNESCO have very strict guidelines on the works that are undertaken here, on how visitors are controlled and so on. They have agreed, once the site was granted World Heritage status, to keep the visitor numbers to 1995 levels, which is about 10,000, 12,000 a year. They maintain 3 guides on the island at all times, and these people are more than just guides, they're also custodians. There's also a team of conservation experts working on the island for many, many years now to the best international standards.
Well, for me as an architect, this is just an incredible piece of architecture. But for you, what's really special about it for you?
I think it has to be the view of the small Skellig through the 12th century window of St. Michael's Church here. It's a sort of an iconic image of the Skellig. It's a very well-known one.
For the visitor who can't make it onto the island or wants to learn more, the Skellig's Experience Centre is a good starting point for exploring the area. The southwest region of Kerry, from Sneem to Valentia, benefits greatly from having the Skelligs as a magnet, drawing tourists in. But the same issues of protecting the landscape from the negative impacts of tourism exists in equal measure on land. This whole area could potentially become a geopark and is working hard to enable sustainable tourism to develop. There are endless opportunities for walking, cycling, or for just simply experiencing the natural environment. Let's hope that in the future we can leave it as beautifully untouched as it is today. There are certainly lessons to be learned from the Skelligs, always in view, just a few miles from the shore.
I suppose it's not good for the environment really to get a new car every year. It's better to stick with one really.
Don't see why people have to change their cars like they change their socks. I mean, as long as it goes. I mean, I've had a car for 5-6 years now and it's fine as long as, you know, I can drive it from A to B. I don't mind. I don't see the point of having to get a brand new up-to-date car.
I would only change my car if it was falling apart. Or if somebody gave me a brand new one.
I do think there is a certain kind of thing where we want to look the part. I mean, the car is what we are these days. I mean, that's how we kind of show our affluence. So I think there is a great deal of that. And I think it's a pity because it just is kind of indicative of the waste in society in general today, I think.
And it's clearly just, you know, an image thing, which is pretty sad or whatever.
We're a nation obsessed with the wheels beneath our feet. We spend more on cars and drive further and longer than anyone else in Europe.
Recalculating.
We literally can't get enough of them. We don't care how much they cost or how much fuel they guzzle, as long as we look good in the gridlock. We drive them into the ground, but up till now, the end of the road hasn't been a pretty sight. But all that's about to change. A car is a rotten investment. After the first couple of years, its value nosedives, and it only levels off when it reaches about 100,000 kilometres. After 10 years, depreciation is in hundreds of euros rather than thousands per year. After that, it has very little commercial value. But the days of dumping a car are well and truly over. These days, all waste must be treated as a resource to be reclaimed and reused.
We can't keep the production lines going and then just throw cars away at the end of their life. There is no away. Manufacturers and importers now have to make provision for the collection and recovery of the cars they make and bring into the country. And the owners have to take cars to an authorised treatment facility and get a certificate of destruction. From the 1st of January, owners of intact end-of-life cars and vans can deposit them free of charge. This is a free take-back system.
Now you have to treat a car as hazardous material, which means that, you know, when the car comes in here, I have to extract all the washes, the brake fluids, the gear oil, the engine oil, the petrol. That all goes into holding tanks there. That has to be disposed of in an environmentally friendly way. The rubbers, they have to be taken off the cars. They didn't before, they have to be taken off.
Yeah, because they're now recycled, aren't they?
Oh, they are, yeah.
All tires.
Yeah. Well, Duncan, last year, you know, you could actually throw a car through a fragmentizer with tires on it. You know.
So it's all changed? Like,
oh, it's totally changed.
So typically, up till, say, last year, what was going on?
Literally nothing. A car came into a scrapyard, the battery was taken out of it, and that was as much that was done with it. There was nothing else.
You crush it here, is that it?
Yeah.
And what happens after that?
Well, we send ours to a fragmentizer. The fragmentizer, it just goes literally up a belt. It's shredded so small, you'd hardly believe it. I mean, you have pieces sort of 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. The steel is separated from the non-ferrous metals. The aluminium comes out separate.
When a car gets older, there are growing maintenance costs for keeping it on the road. Insurance companies seem to be the main source of proper collection of old cars. At the end of the day, it appears that basic wear and tear will bring a car to the point that it simply is too hazardous to keep on the road. And insurance companies recognise this.
The end of life of vehicles came in a year ago. Is there been any change in the number of cars now being dumped up in the Wicklow Mountains?
The Pure project still receive a number of reports in relation to abandoned cars up in the Wicklow, Dublin upland areas. But since the end-of-life vehicles was introduced, there's been approximately 20% reduction.
20%? So how many cars roughly would that be?
It's over 50. Over 50 a year.
Right, so that's making a big difference, isn't it?
We have seen a difference in it in relation to the phone calls coming in and in relation to recovery of these cars in the upland areas.
So what sort of damage are they doing?
Well, if you look at the various components which exist within a car, you have battery acid, you have various oils, gearbox oils, you have hydraulic oils, you also have petrol and so forth, and they actually leach into the soils and they cause soil erosion, they cause a huge amount of problems to watercourses, and then a lot of the cars itself, the components, the metals and so forth. So there's a huge amount of environmental impact that caused by cars being left in the landscape.
What advice would you give to somebody that's got an old car and it's come to its end of life?
My advice would be to bring it into the registered centres, and you can bring them in for nothing. It costs nothing. It's free to deliver these cars. They can give you a certificate of destruction, and then you know that these cars are not ending up in the environment. Don't give them to any garage, don't give them to anybody who calls to your house. You can bring them in yourself. It's just like recycling your electrical goods, your cans or your bottles, and then you're doing your little bit for the environment.
Insurance companies only account for a small percentage of cars coming off the roads. We need car manufacturers to also feed all used cars into the new system for recycling. At present, car manufacturers seem to be avoiding this responsibility. This problem needs to be addressed now as a mandatory enforcement issue.
So what happens to these older cars?
But some of our older cars are finding their way back out onto the market, and they are being driven to their end of life. They're being abandoned and burnt out in different parts of the city and the country.
This new scheme is not without its teething problems, as many old cars are still not being delivered to the authorised treatment facilities. There are illegal scrapyards who break them up with no environmental precautions, and unscrupulous garages who simply resell the old cars for whatever they can get.
Cork County Council put up a helicopter and they discovered 15 unauthorised scrapyards. They were selling these. So where there's money, there's always going to be problems like this.
It's mostly these cars that are found illegally dumped and burnt out in our countryside.
Well, this is the sort of problem that we're really trying to tackle, the burnt out cars that get abandoned. These cause huge problems for the environment. All the pollutants that escape out of these through the burning process, all these chemicals getting into the atmosphere, but also all the liquids that will now leak into the groundwater and into our sewers, etc. These can cause huge environmental problems too. This is what we're trying to tackle here.
These authorised treatment facilities operate under a waste licence or a permit that ensures the cars are disposed of in an appropriate way, and there is proper treatment and storage of components containing hazardous fluids and spare parts. There would be no other way of getting a certificate of destruction, and only authorised treatment facilities will have the right to issue them. If anyone is offering to get rid of your car cheaply, beware, as there are fines of between 3 and 15,000 euro, or between 1 and 10 years. It's the polluter pays principle which is becoming part of our way of life and is our only real way forward for this huge environmental problem.
Commuting traffic around all our major cities has increased hugely over the last few years. This piles up even further when school is back because now people are dropping their kids off by car, despite the fact that a lot of these kids live only 2 kilometres from their school. The school run adds significantly to CO2 emissions. So if you're close enough to the school, walking in groups is an option, cycling safely, organising carpools with other parents, or catching the bus.
Did you know that the air you breathe and the food you eat can affect the way your body grows and works? It's true. By learning about hazards around us, like water, air, pollution, and pesticides, and how they can affect our health, you can take charge of your environment. You can make a real difference in your life, the lives of your family and friends.
Safeguarding our future health and for the next generation is obviously a priority. We may think that our increased wealth would have given us the resources to solve all our health issues, but it now appears that new development itself could be the cause of new health problems.
Today's Ireland is unrecognisable from the one we left behind us 10 years ago. We're now wealthy, a model for new European countries to aspire to, a benchmark for the economic miracle that sustains life as we now know it in the 21st century comes with a price. So, our environment, when we talk about our environment, how does it impact our health?
Well, the very air we breathe, the water we drink, the food, the conditions we work in, the conditions we live in, all of those things can impact, for better or worse, on our quality of life.
The new National Environmental Health Action Plan looks at how we can best optimise our health, our environment, and our quality of life nationwide.
So when you talk about well-being and quality of life, what do you mean?
What we talk about with quality of life is a model that we've based the whole planning of the NEHAP upon, and that is 4 areas really. It's to do with people's health, because obviously the health that people enjoy very much affects their quality of life, and that can be either their own personal health or it can be the health services that they have access to. It's to do with their economic situation, both personally and nationally, because both of those can affect the quality of a person's life. It's also very important that their environment is good, because to live in a poor environment obviously diminishes your quality of life in many different ways, quite apart from just your health. And also community is very important, because the community that somebody believes they do or don't belong to can affect their quality of life very dramatically, because if people don't believe that they have a place within a community, then that can lead to all sorts of detrimental health effects.
This plan sets out to take the pulse of Irish life for the first time and to see how progress is impacting on the environment, and through that on our quality of life. It may come as a surprise that up until now, the environment didn't have to be taken into account in any planning decision made in our National Development Plan. Understandably, with the rate of progress we've seen, this couldn't continue.
Well, within the plan and the document, we've already looked at all of those issues relating to environment and health, and we've laid the baseline down as to where we are at now. In some areas, obviously Ireland is not performing as well as it might, but in other areas I would have to say it is performing quite well if you take a European or an international level of judgment on that. So there's some areas where we've room for improvement, and we've other areas where we have a lot of room for improvement.
To put it simply, our growing population and increased move to sprawling development is putting pressure on our infrastructure. By recognising the importance of environment and health in our policy making, we can cut down on our exposure to future problems. This is something we've failed to do up until now.
Bethan, with our new kind of affluence, have we traded a lot of our quality of life?
Well, I think there are pluses and minuses, obviously, and I think, probably, I know for myself, I'd be much happier if I didn't spend so long in the car and wasn't so tempted to reach on the shelf for convenience foods. And certainly the lack of time, which you hear a lot of people complaining about, they don't have enough time for their family, they don't have enough time to take exercise, is creating its own problems. And one of the packages, if you like, of one of the problems is the whole area of convenience foods, lack of exercise, and the obesity epidemic that we're observing.
Linking environmental concerns to economic decisions may seem like common sense, but it's something we have not always done. Galway's rapid expansion led to a drop in the quality of the local drinking water supply. Increased consumption led to a huge problem with waste disposal throughout the country. And a lack of public transport infrastructure and bad planning has led to long commutes on overstressed routes.
Jerry, how important is a good environment for our health?
I think it's absolutely essential. We're determined by what we're born with, our genetic background, and then our interaction with the environment. So the quality of the air that we breathe, the water and the food that we take, and our daily interactions with the environment are going to determine our health. And that's really all we can influence, because we can't choose our parents.
What are the common disorders that children suffer from environmental influences?
Well, I guess in terms of respiratory illnesses, we would see a lot of respiratory infection and childhood asthma. And to some extent that's determined by exposure to viruses, but also air quality I think does have an influence as well. It doesn't take a great deal of imagination to imagine that if you're chronically stressed and overworked in a very unhealthy atmosphere, you're not going to live as long as if you're fulfilled and living in a very healthy atmosphere.
By providing a framework for the development of this NEHAP plan at local and national levels, we can avoid some of the future costs that may be a result of today's lifestyle choices.
Let's use our wealth to best effect now that we have established our wealth. Let's use it so that our lives really are better in the round.
This National Environmental Health Action Plan is now awaiting government ratification and is anticipated to take effect in 2008. We may not see instant results for these new initiatives, but we should recognise how groundbreaking they are. Hopefully, if we manage to influence major policies at local and national level, we'll be able to leave the country in as good, if not better, condition as we got it in. In our next episode, we explore what happens to our food waste. why our red squirrel could face extinction. And we travel to Lough Foyle to see how our wild salmon stocks of the north have revitalised.